webinar on air source heat pumps. My name is Parlin Meyer. I am director and an architectural designer and project manager for BrightBuilt Home. I'm going to introduce the rest of the BrightBuilt project managers that are here today, and then we will introduce Dana and let him take it away. So I will hand it over to Jess next for her introduction.
Hi, I'm Jessica Benner. I have been working with BrightBuilt Home for just over 5 years now as an architectural designer and project coordinator, as well as the marketing director. Audrey?
Hi, I'm Audrey Rolio. I have been working with BrightBuilt for just over 2 years now and work as a project manager, designer, and energy modeler. I've been with high performance design for a number of years, since 2011. And Lauren.
Hi, my name is Lauren. I'm a newer addition to the all-star team here with BrightBuilt. I've been working here for 2.5 months, and I am also an architectural designer.
I'm going to jump in right before we introduce Dana just to do some housekeeping items. So Dana will be giving the presentation. He'll be taking the reins on that momentarily. But during the course of the presentation, please feel free to pose any questions you might have in the Q&A section of your Zoom. So you'll at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you'll see the Q&A button. You can click on that and enter any questions you have. We will be holding all questions until the end of Dana's presentation, at which time we will address both the questions that are posed during his presentation as well as those that you posed in the RSVP form when you registered for the webinar. So we'll be covering those at the end. And during the course of the presentation, the BrightBuilt folks will turn off their videos and mute themselves and kind of fade into the background while Dana takes the center stage. So without further ado, here is Dana Fischer.
Good morning, everyone, or I guess good noon, good lunch. My name is Dana Fischer. I'm the area manager for Mitsubishi Electric for Maine and New Hampshire. And that pretty much means that for the past number of years, I've had lots and lots of conversations with all the contractors and distributors of Mitsubishi equipment across these 2 states. I conduct a fair amount of training for them on proper applications of equipment and sizing and placement and best practices. And prior to being at Mitsubishi, I was at Efficiency Maine for 7 years. I helped set up the home energy savings program and all the criteria associated with weatherization and conventional heating systems and rebates on heat pumps as well. And also played a role in setting up PACE loans and the current residential loan platform that's available in the state today. And so it's with a great pleasure that I am on the call with you today. I'm really thankful to Parlin and the entire team at BrightBuilt for having me come on to talk about heat pumps. I have a slide deck that's sort of the air source heat pump 101, and I'm going to go through the principles of how they operate, some different examples of placement and different considerations. But I was really impressed by the number of very thoughtful questions that were submitted in advance of today. And so I want to make sure I move through the deck pretty quickly just to get through sort of the introductory material for everyone. But I want to make sure we have ample time to answer the very specific questions that folks had. And so, there's going to be a lot of information today, and it's going to come at a little bit of a fire hose pace. That's sort of my standard. And so, if you have follow-up questions to anything that I'm talking about in particular, we're going to make sure we have plenty of time to go into it, whatever level of excruciating detail and deep weeds that people want to get to. So without any further ado on that, and just chime in the chat box, and I'm going to try and leave at least a half an hour for those conversations because there's lots of different rabbit holes that we can jump into. Really, really good stuff. So I'm going to share my screen now and go to from the beginning here on my slide deck. Okay, everybody see that all right? Okay, super. All right, so here we are, the end of March, heading into summer, and everybody's interested in cooling, relative to heating. And of course, heat pumps, we're talking about heat pumps. So to just kind of lay the groundwork for everybody, what we're talking about is there are indoor units and there are outdoor units. And the outdoor units are these big box fan looking things, and they have a radiator coil in them, and they have a compressor in them, and they have a bunch of valves and controls, and they come in a variety of different sizes, and that pertains to the amount of heating and cooling capacity that they can provide. A smaller unit has a lower capacity, and some of these large units that have double fans have a large amount of capacity, and they have, you know, different maximum outputs and they have different minimum outputs, because all of these systems are called inverter driven, which means that they can scroll up to a very high speed and scroll down to a very low speed, but not totally to the bottom. So there's limitations as to how low they can go, and that very much depends on the equipment. Now, of course, you know, I've been working for Mitsubishi, so all of my slide decks are reflective of Mitsubishi, but a lot about what we're going to talk about today is consistent with, you know, heat pumps across all the different manufacturers, not only in terms of the sort of the range of products that are available, but also their general capabilities. And there are reasons to go for one manufacturer or the other, and I have very strong and clear preference. But I just want to mention that much of what we're going to talk about today and the questions that we'll discuss pertain to all the heat pumps that are being installed in Maine, which, you know, of course, Efficiency Maine's on track to provide rebates to more than 20,000 systems over the course of the next year. So outside of the, you know, the outside units, we also have a variety of different kinds of indoor units. Traditionally, or most commonly, the wall mount units are installed. You know, it tends to be a less expensive project, requires slightly less labor. You get very high efficiency out of all the units, but, you know, wall mounts are sort of the meat and potatoes of the industry at this point. I guess, you know, typically there's some amount of aesthetic objection to having wall mounts positioned around the house. And so people that are tiptoeing or investigating heat pumps for their homes, sometimes they're like, oh, geez, you know, I don't know if I really want to have one of those things on the wall. And so there's sort of two parts to that. One is, honestly, within about 3 weeks, it'll disappear. You won't really see it. And even if you do see it, you will forgive it 100 different sins, because you'll love the incredible comfort of the heating and cooling that you receive. And we hear that back from clients all the time, that they can't imagine why they had objected before. And then the other alternative is there are different kinds of indoor units that don't have the same format as wall mounts. So here in the blue square, I have a ceiling cassette. This particular ceiling cassette from Mitsubishi Electric, the cabinet is just shy of 14.5 inches wide, so it fits into conventional construction for 16 on center joist bays. It's, you know, by the time you get the frame on it, it's close to 4 feet long. So, you know, that does impact the placement, but it's showing up in residential applications on first and second floors. And because of the way it opens up and can be serviced from below, it doesn't require, you know, to have like an access port above, and it doesn't have to be on the second floor where, you know, you could go to, you know, an attic or something to maintain the systems. Then there are floor mounted units. So if you had, you know, a second floor that had knee walls, and you really didn't have, or cathedral ceilings, there really wasn't a good space to put a wall mount unit. The floor mount style systems can direct heating and cooling into the room quite well. Honestly, it doesn't really matter whether you have a unit low on the wall or high on the wall. Just by virtue of the way that they blow air into the space, they can provide good coverage of heating and cooling across sort of a large range. Smallest units can even impact the comfort level, you know, more than 20 feet away, and larger systems with, you know, much bigger blower wheels, they can impact comfort and control temperature, you know, 40, 45, 50 feet away. So it very much depends on the kind of space that you're in as to what kind of indoor equipment that you would select. If a ductless solution like the ceiling cassettes or the floor wall mount unit are appropriate for the space, or the loads for, here we're talking about BrightBuilt, we got low load homes, are really not appropriate to have multiple indoor units throughout, a series of small bedrooms, then maybe a one-to-one ductless, a ducted unit would be appropriate, where, and there are 3 different air handler style ducted units from us, and other manufacturers have their own styles. But like I have it depicted on this page as a full air handler in orange. And just like all the rest of the units, they come in a variety of different sizes. So, the full air handler can come from a unit that's as small as 12,000 BTUs, 18, 24, 30, 36, even all the way up to 42,000 BTUs. And that really large 42,000 BTU unit, you can displace several hundred gallons of oil equivalent, 800-900 gallons of oil equivalent just with one of those units. And they put out an incredible amount of heat at low temperatures. So there are ducted solutions, both on multi-zone and single-zone systems that are appropriate for a wide range of different activities. And so, especially with high-performance homes, there are situations where the loads in parts of the house might be so low that you'd be better off having a small ducted solution that serves multiple rooms. Typically you would just have them ducted and you'd have limited control, just one thermostat for those different spaces. But there are, sophisticated damper controls that can be incorporated to provide zoning solutions for multiple rooms. It's a little bit more expensive to do it that way, but you can, if you're like, I've got to have, damper control in multiple different rooms, you can either do it with motorized dampers or by having just multiple small ducted solutions or ductless solutions, as we've mentioned. Okay, so like here's an example of the ceiling cassette mounted. It really, it doesn't take very long before it just disappears into the motif of the room. Likewise, a wall mount unit might be appropriate. It can have more of a similar appeal or look to a conventional radiator or a wall mount, wall furnace like a Renai or something along those lines. Sometimes that appeals to people a little bit more. But how these systems work is, and I know that this is one of those things that kind of came up in some of those questions, and so I'm going to dive into it a little bit. But basically, the indoor and outdoor units, and there are a whole range of different configurations, but like depicted on this slide is a 1-to-1 unit, meaning one indoor unit to one outdoor unit. And there are multi-zone systems where you can have multiple indoor units connected to a single outdoor unit. And in all these cases, there are a pair of copper refrigerant lines extending from the outdoor unit to the indoor unit. And the system circulates refrigerant, which at this point in time, all these systems use a refrigerant called 410A. And they circulate it through one line between the indoor unit and the outdoor unit, and then circulates back through the other line. And during the winter months, as depicted on this picture, the unit is able to extract heat energy from outdoor air, even when it's very, very cold, and blow even colder air out into your backyard, and take that heat energy and move it into the house and blow that heat energy into your house. And so this sounds like magic, but I'm going to describe it. I'm going to try and describe it in a way that helps it make sense. And really, the first part of this is that the Freon, the 410A, which stays in the system, there can be circumstances where there's a problem with the system, or it isn't installed properly, or somebody backs a truck into it and refrigerant could get released, but that is uncommon and to be avoided. And the systems don't consume any refrigerant in their normal operation at all. And if the system's installed properly, the refrigerant will last for the life of the system. And then when the system needs to be replaced or serviced, the refrigerant is recovered and recycled. So I just and if there are some follow-up questions on that, we can certainly get to it. But the boiling point of this refrigerant 410A that's currently in use, and of prospective refrigerants that are due to come out with, even lower global warming potential impact, for their release, have a boiling point of -50 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, so when the refrigerant, and inside of the system, it can be at a relatively low pressure or a relatively high pressure. And relatively low pressure is like 100 psi, which seems like a pretty high pressure, but that's pretty low pressure for these systems. And 400 and slightly above that is about as high as it gets in normal operation. And so the refrigerant, let's imagine we're starting at the top of the cycle where this yellow arrow is. The refrigerant travels at roughly room temperature, and this is heating cycle, to the outdoor unit where it goes through an expansion valve, which is really just a tiny little orifice. And when the high pressure refrigerant at room temperature goes through this tiny little orifice, it expands into the large outdoor coil or radiator that sits in the outdoor unit. And when it does that, it changes its volume, and it increases in volume and drops in temperature based on the gas laws. And we can dive into physics if you want, but basically it dives towards its boiling point of -50 degrees Fahrenheit. And I'm just going to digress briefly and say that, heat energy, we oftentimes think of it as this invisible force or something that, kind of it just exists around us. But if you imagine heat energy as a particle, and this is really sort of like a concept that's part of quantum mechanics. So like if you think of heat energy as little particles, and the more heat particles there are, the hotter something is. So the greater the density of heat particles in any particular thing, whether it's your cup of coffee or your cat, they have a certain heat density, and those heat particles are always trying to leap from whatever is hot to something that's colder. So like you leave out your cup of coffee and the heat particles are just streaming off of that thing, jumping off into the rest of the room, and going wherever they can cling that's a colder surface area. So the absence of heat particles, entirely zero heat particles, would be absolute zero, which is sort of like outer space. Like there's just no heat energy there. And that's like -273 degrees centigrade. So in your backyard, even when it's really, really stupid cold, like 0 degrees or -10 degrees, there's still a lot of heat energy in the yard. It's not as much as when it's a beautiful 70 degree or 50 degree day like it is today, but there's still a lot of heat energy there. And so when the refrigerant goes into a low pressure state and heads for its boiling point, diving towards, -30, -40 degrees, even when it's very cold outside, the heat energy will cling to that outside coil and get absorbed into the refrigerant in sequence as it's traveling through the coil. And then it goes into the outdoor compressor. And that compressor takes that volume of refrigerant with whatever heat particles are manifesting in the current outdoor air temperature, and it compresses them. And so now you have a high pressure refrigerant that has a higher density of heat particles, which is the manifestation of a higher temperature. So when the refrigerant comes out of the compressor, now it's like 120 or 130 degrees because it's absorbed that heat energy, and it's densified at a higher pressure. So then it travels in through this red line by the red arrow up into your indoor coil and warms up the indoor coil, and then the indoor fan blows that heat energy and distributes all those heat particles across your room, warming up your sofa and your sheetrock and your cat. And then during the summer months, there's a 4-way valve inside of the outdoor unit that basically reverses the flow so that you're now extracting heat energy from the indoor unit, and then it travels at room temperature into the compressor, and the compressor superheats that refrigerant and blows those heat particles out into your backyard, warming up your bushes, and then goes through the expansion valve again, which drops it back down because it's expanded, and the volume of the liquid is diving towards colder temperatures. It goes into your indoor unit closer to a temperature of like 40 degrees Fahrenheit, which when it's blowing the indoor air through that coil, the heat particles are clinging to that, and the air coming out the other side with less heat particles feels cold because it's colder because it doesn't have as much heat energy because that's been absorbed in the refrigerant as it goes through this cycle. So that's sort of like, I know that when I was in high school and they started talking about the refrigerant cycle, boy, it just about made me go to sleep every single time. So I've tried to develop this in a way that it makes some sense, and I hope that kind of helps with the sense of how the magic works. Now, on this slide right here, this is from a little over a year ago, January of 2020. And of course, this past winter was relatively mild, and 2020 wasn't, the prior winter wasn't freezing cold either. But you can see in purple the polar vortex that's swirling above, the globe, hopefully. And of course, periodically it sort of sends down, an arm. And of course, this year the big news was the polar vortex, or extremely cold temperatures plunging down into Texas. But it's been a few years since we had that occur in Maine. It was actually the end of 2017 and the beginning of 2018, a 2-week period, when we saw the coldest weather that we've seen in a very long time. And even during that period of time when the polar vortex came through, and I was working for Mitsubishi and visiting all the installers and all the distributors, nobody was having any problems with their heat pumps operating or providing heat for their home. I mean, I was going around and everybody was very busy addressing no heat conditions for conventional heating systems, but I wasn't getting any complaints about Mitsubishi equipment whatsoever. And I haven't gotten any since then. I mean, that was an extreme event, but I didn't really get any complaints this past winter or the prior winter. And let me tell you, if somebody was going to pick up the phone and complain about their heat pumps, I would be that guy that would get that phone call from the sales reps or the contractors or anybody else. But it just doesn't happen. And part of the reason, that people are concerned about this is because traditionally heat pumps really weren't designed to operate at really low temperatures. They either didn't have a refrigerant that had these super cold capabilities to have a really low boiling point, and they didn't have compressors that could spin up to very high RPMs. Because like in our discussion of how it's moving the heat, when it's really cold outside and your house needs a lot of heat, the heat pump just goes and scoops that little bit of heat energy and brings it inside and blows it into your room. And if you need a lot of heat energy moved from outside to inside, the unit has to run at a very high speed in order to have that refrigerant, scooping up the energy and moving it into the house fast enough to match the heat loss out of your house. Now, of course, with BrightBuilt homes, you have a very tight house. Your heat loads are relatively low, and so you don't even need a whole lot of heat pump equipment in order to accomplish that task. But even if you had a leaky farmhouse, if you applied enough equipment to it to match the heat load for the house, and this is, there are calculations and ways of assessing what the heat load is, you can heat just about any kind of space, even in Maine and New Hampshire, with heat pumps, as long as they're designed to provide heat at cold temperatures, like all the equipment that receives rebates through Efficiency Maine, and that you've selected equipment or a combination of multiple pieces of equipment in order to accomplish the task that you're asking for. And not just, and a good designer will look at not only what the maximum capacity of the system is at really cold temperatures to make sure people are warm enough to meet their needs, but it's also critically important that the sizing is not so great that the system can't scroll down low enough to satisfy the needs of the home during the shoulder seasons. And I mean, like, some amount of cycling, turning on and off, will occur on every system. It's just inherent. Like, when you get to a certain point, you need just a teeny bit of cooling. Okay, the system's going to turn on a little bit. But what we want to avoid in the course of sizing is having so much equipment or so large equipment that it's cycling for significant portions of the year. And so that's one of the considerations that has to be taken into account with high performance homes. And one of the key strategies for avoiding that kind of a problem is to have multiple outdoor units. because this, smaller single zone systems will have more of a turn down ratio that can be more reflective of the kind of low heat load conditions that high performance homes can experience. And we'll get into a lot of those questions. I know we're 25 minutes in already, and I want to make sure that we are really addressing those different things. So I'm going to scoot through some of these last pieces, but I really just want to emphasize, Norway, which from the chart on the globe here, you can see is in teal blue or light blue, just like New England, and they have more experience than we do using cold climate heat pumps. Heat pumps showed up in Maine around 2012, 2013 with the rebate programs from Efficiency Maine, but they had been installing ductless mini splits in Norway starting back in 2002, 2003. And they went through an incredible transformation of their heating infrastructure, installing nearly 1 million heat pumps over the course of a 12-year period. And Norway has about 4 times the population and number of households as the state of Maine. So it's not unreasonable to think that in a 10 or 12-year period of time, that Maine could also, could install 250,000 heat pumps. In fact, that's really consistent with the goals of both Efficiency Maine, the legislature, and the Climate Commission that was formed by, through the governor's office. So, in fact, Maine is really kind of, equivalent to this gold diamond in this general trajectory, the trajectory that we've seen over the course of the last 6-8 years in blue. And the legislative objectives of having 100,000 heat pumps installed in the next, well, it's 4 years now, is really highlighted by this red line, which is a much steeper climb, but we're seeing it. It's happening right now, and it's not inconsistent with the kind of growth rate that happened in Norway, a decade ago. Okay, so we're seeing sales continue to climb on our side. And we are seeing lots of homes that install heat pumps with renewable energy and really have no backup whatsoever. And we'll get into greater depth with the series of questions that we'll go through. But it is entirely plausible to set up an arrangement where you would rely entirely on heat pumps for your heating source in Maine. It isn't to say that if you want to have a wood stove or a gas-fired fireplace or something else, that's entirely your choice, and you may enjoy that, but you may be able to turn your wood-burning methods from an occupation or anticipated occupation into something that's more of a hobby, where you really just burn wood when you want to, or when it's really, really cold and you prefer to have that kind of heat. But it's not entirely necessary, and you can certainly select equipment that will heat your house entirely. In fact, I'll just sort of highlight that by saying that, I know of a contractor right in Holton who, for a number of years, using systems that are at this point, a whole generation ago of equipment, it has not used oil for several years in his house, and he has, he has 4 single zone systems in his house by virtue of the way that he's installed them and done the whole thing, and he doesn't need any. So if people in Presque Isle and Fairfield and Holton can get away with no backup heat, I think we can do that in southern Maine quite easily, and the rest of New England for that matter. And even in retrofitting schools, heat pumps are serving a big purpose across New England. The school in Hollis, New Hampshire, is a primary school. They spray foam the entire exterior of this block and brick school that was having just incredible heat costs and fluctuations in temperature from one side of the building to the other. And then they installed heat pumps in the classroom, heads in each one of indoor units in each one of the classrooms. And now their classroom has a much improved learning environment. So again, a wide range of different products, and we can talk about all the different ways that they can be controlled in the course of our questions. I have a few more slides on this regarding different pictures of units and multi-zones and controls, but I really want to just get to the questions that we have, and if we need to refer back to any of these, we can.
Dana, actually, I think that those slides you just scrolled through would be potentially really welcome to see. I think some of these pointers for installation considerations and sizing and space requirements, that actually would be, I think, helpful to go through if you can go through them quickly, and then we can transition to the
Okay.
questions. I think that might
Sure,
be.
absolutely. Right. So sort of akin, this deck is akin to some of the very first slide that I pointed to, showing the overall style. And again, like this full range of products here is available through other manufacturers. So I don't want to give everybody of course, Mitsubishi is the best. And, we support our product and have, a huge network of contractors all through Maine and New Hampshire. But I really don't want to give people the impression that all the information that I have pertains only to us. So there are a range of different air handlers, and these air handlers, you can size them to cover 100% of your load. But if you really wanted to make sure that you had some backup in case anything happened with your air handler, there are electric heat kits that can be purchased optionally and controlled to turn on anytime there's a communication error, or if the air handler is unable to keep up with the peak load of the house. So that tends to be sort of a belt and suspenders approach that can be quite popular. There are traditional square ceiling cassettes, again, in a very wide range of sizes. Typically, these smaller ones, 9 through 15,000 BTUs, are the ones that would be used in residential circumstances, although the cabinet is 24 by 24 at the top. So that may require some framing in order to accommodate that space, as opposed to the MLZ one-way ceiling cassette that fits in between 16 on center joists. I've seen plenty of houses that install these exclusively, and they'll have 6, 7, 8 of these units throughout the entire house. The smallest one of those right now is a 9,000 BTU model. We are coming out with a 6,000 BTU MLZ that'll even be in a tinier package, due out later this year. The KJs are the floor mounts, up to 18,000 BTUs. Again, I've seen homes where people opt to use these instead of wall mounts. Although the wall mounts come in a variety of different shapes and sizes, including our designer series that comes in very gloss white, black, and stainless steel, very attractive, and you can use those throughout your home, although they are really only applicable to multi-zone systems. There's no one-to-one solution that uses those. The FH product line that's depicted in this picture has very recently transitioned to an FS, and visually it looks identical. Both the indoor and outdoor units are physically are the same, but it has higher, so between the algorithms and some of the changes that they made to the coils and the outdoor unit, they've been able to boost the output of the capacity at colder temperatures by 15 to 20%, depending on the model. So really puts them in a class of their own for their output. Additionally, the new FS product has what's called a dual barrier coating, that makes the innards of it, the coil and the blower wheel, extremely smooth, so that they really don't collect any dust and debris. All these systems do need some level of maintenance, and that actually reduces the frequency. You need some of the cleaning. There are, here are a couple of pictures of different applications. So air handlers can be situated vertically, sort of like you'd see a traditional furnace in your basement. So this is your airflow coming down to the bottom of the unit from your return vents, and then going out up into the your network of ducting that would go throughout the structure. But it's also possible to mount these horizontally and have the airflow go from one side to the other, in an attic. I've seen this in basements as well. It really depends on the layout. And then the other ducted option is this slim duct. So this can fit in above ceilings, depending on how low the ceiling is relative to maybe your thermal barrier in the second floor. This would be appropriate. There are units that are low static. That means that they have a blower capacity that would really suit maybe one room. But there are also mid-static slim duct units, in our case called PEADs, that are able to, distribute air across an entire floor or an entire ranch if it's selected properly and sized for its capacity. So, down here we depict a framing style where you have this center chamber. It's, and that happens in a lot of high performance homes where you could basically have all your ductwork positioned in the center of the house above. And so a slim duct system like this would make a lot of sense for that. And then you'd have a hatch to service it, but all your ductwork would be enclosed and hidden. Single zone systems, you can do one-to-one for every single one of our styles of indoor units. And as I mentioned, they have a little bit of a better turn down ratio. So most of the single zone, here again, it depends on the models, but a lot of the units like the FS product has a turn down ratio where the smaller units will go down to even 15% of their maximum capacity, whereas the multi-zone systems may only go down to about 35 or 45% of their maximum capacity. And so that gets into your design considerations to make sure that you're not getting into a situation where you have one large multi-zone system that can't really get down to a low enough level for the kind of seasonal needs that are required in a high performance home. But multi-zone systems you can mix and match. You could have all one style of indoor unit, or you can mix and match and have one of each or any combination thereof, up to certain limitations on the matching of the indoor and outdoor capacity. So in this example here, I mean, like this looks like a, we'll call this a 5C42, which would be a non-hyperheat unit, probably not appropriate depending on, if you're trying to get heating out of it entirely as well. But even though it's a 42,000 BTU rated cooling capacity, you can attach up to 52,000 BTUs of indoor equipment stuff, unless you have an air handler attached, in which case you're limited to 100% of the capacity, which in this case would be 42,000. So there are little rules like that, just a couple of them, but all of your diamond contractors that are familiar with our equipment, as well as BrightBuilt, there's software to lay out, that's free, that to lay out exactly what the equipment is and have full confidence that the configuration is going to work and what the output from each one of those zones would be. There are a variety of different controls that are available. So we have a product called Kumo that you put an adapter in each one of the indoor units, and then you can control and monitor the temperature of each one of those over Wi-Fi from anywhere on your phone.
Hey, Dana.
Yep.
Sorry to interrupt. I think I will interject at this point because we're now getting to the point where we've got about 20 minutes left. So I think we can go ahead and if you have a couple things you want to close out, I don't want to stop you.
Nope. Just there's a variety of different, I think that's a great idea. As I kind of mentioned at the very beginning, I do extensive 6-hour webinars, so I can talk a lot and fast, but we've got a lot of specific questions and I want to make sure we get to them. So why don't I end sharing right now?
Okay.
And we can get to those questions, and if then there's particular areas that people want to dive into and we have time, then that's great.
Okay, great. Okay, so we have one question that just came in on the Q&A. I'll start with that one, and then we can dive into some of the other ones that were posed ahead of time. This is from Sharon. She asks, I have an older generation Mitsubishi unit, and I cannot say enough good things about it. It's awesome. What kind of maintenance should I be doing with it?
Okay, so the most important, first of all, anybody that's using these systems, if they're using a wall mount system or floor mount system, one of the ductless units, they really need to check the screens, probably monthly during high use seasons, whether that's cooling or heating, just to make sure that the amount of lint and other things in the air are getting cleaned off. And I usually take mine out and just go over to the spray nozzle that with the tub and just rinse it off and flap it around a little bit and stick it back in. And while that takes care of a lot of the air, the debris that's floating around in the air, it's typically a good idea to get a thorough professional cleaning of your indoor units as frequently as needed to keep the coil clear and clean. And so that's sort of like a big, well, how often is that? And the answer is, it totally depends on how many pets you have and the dust load in your house and some degree how it's built. So you know, you can look up there in a flashlight and you can see if it's growing a sweater inside of your indoor unit and be like, oh man, I've got to get a professional cleaning done. And so sometimes that might be annually, but sometimes it might only need to happen 2 or 3, you know, every 2 or 3 years. So it very much depends, but you just have a professional come in and they have a bib that hangs down below the wall mount unit, and they've got it's like a little wand that's a mini pressure washer, and they'll spray it all out with, you know, a soapy solution, and you'll be good to go for another couple of years.
And who would you hire to do that? Would that be a diamond contractor, Dana, or who?
Yep,
would?
anyone. You know, typically your first phone call would be to, you know, who your original installer was. But if your original installer, you know, was not set up to do scheduled cleanings, there are lots of companies that have an entire team that all they do is schedule cleanings.
Okay, great. All right, we'll hand it to Jessica for the next question.
Sure. What are some recent heat pump improvements for colder climates?
Okay, so I mean, like, you know, 410A as a refrigerant has been around for, you know, more than a decade, and that's like one of the major technological advantages that's come along that makes a big difference in how these perform. We already described that. The second is the inverter-driven motors that are inside of the fans and the compressors. The compressors are incredibly sophisticated and have incredibly high-tech electronic controls as well as magnets, and really they perform like 3-phase motors. When the 220 comes into the outdoor unit, it gets converted into like 400 volt DC and then split into 3 phases, and it goes into the motor and the unit operates like it's almost like a 3-phase motor, extremely efficient, and you're able to modulate it through many different speeds based on what's going on in the house. And so that's really part of how these units can deliver such low cost heat relative to burning fuels, is that for every 1 unit of electricity that you put into the motors and the fans and the compressor, they're able to move, even in Maine on a seasonal basis, 3 units of heat from outdoor air and move it into your house and blow it into your house. So like, you know, where we are in Maine at like, I don't know, like 16 cents a kilowatt hour, it's really on a seasonal basis, it's something like $1.60 a gallon oil equivalent. And of course, you know, if you talk to, you know, people that are selling oil, they'll say, well, when it gets really cold, it's more expensive. And so you shouldn't use it below a certain temperature. And of course, it really depends on the price of the commodity that you're dealing with. I mean, there's basically no temperature at which propane is cheaper. And even for oil, you're pretty much, you know, you got to be below 0 degrees at least before it would be even a penny cheaper. And so the amount of time that you spend at temperatures below that and the amount of modicum savings that would occur, it's just not worth talking about. It's like $5 worth of savings if you were to perfectly switch it on and off every time you're below that economic balance point.
Follow-up to the question quickly is based on that new technology that's recently come out, for people who have older units in their homes, would you recommend, would that warrant upgrading? Or
if you have a system that qualified for an efficiency Maine rebate and provides you with some, you know, it matches your loads, I don't think that you would be able to justify the cost of changing that equipment. If you get to the end of your life, the end of life of that equipment, and you want to upgrade, you've already invested in the infrastructure, the copper line sets and the electrical lines that go between the indoor and outdoor unit. And so the incremental cost of, you know, upgrading that equipment at the end of its life will be lower. And so, you know, that's sort of a benefit, but I wouldn't necessarily jump to a new set of equipment unless the equipment that you currently have is not satisfying the needs of the home.
Great. Somebody asked, this is kind of an interesting compare contrast. Someone's asking about the cost of operating heat pumps compared with the cost of heating with wood in northern New England.
Right. Well, so it very much depends on where you're getting your wood from, right? So if it's free wood, you're paying for the gas and the chainsaw and whatever else. But if you're buying wood You know, again, it depends on the price per cord, but a cord of wood, typically green, that, you know, is I don't know, something like $2.50 a cord, something like that. And a cord of wood is equivalent to $1.80, I'm sorry, 180 gallons of oil. So, you know, using wood is pretty cheap, and probably, you know, comparable. It's pretty comparable. So if actually, at Efficiency Maine, if you go to the Efficiency Maine website, efficiencymaine.com, they have a compare heating cost calculator. And that the defaults of the commodity prices in there are updated periodically, so they're pretty close to actually what it is. And you can look at what an existing or proposed heating systems would be, and it shows the equivalent amount of cost for the equivalent amount of heat for all the different heat sources. And so you can compare and contrast what different heat sources would cost, including wood stoves.
Okay, next question. How are the hookups done? Can the condenser be installed on an exterior wall?
So the outdoor units, they need to be outside, first of all. I know sometimes it comes up, people want to know if they can put it in a garage or if they put it, you know, in a basement or something like that, but it really needs to be outside. And they can be, and I had a couple of slides showing this, but like they can be mounted to the wall of the house. But if they're mounted to the wood of the wall, there is some occasions where it will cause vibration in the house that will sound a little bit almost like a pickup truck idling outside of the house. And so most of the time it doesn't really bother people, but some people are more sensitive than others. And so to avoid that, a lot of contractors will instead mount them on freestanding racks that sit on pads on the ground on top of some pea stone, to avoid you know, sort of frost heaving. And then so the outdoor unit's mounted to that pad. Sometimes they'll also use brackets that will have a little bit of an extra loop to them, and they lag down at the bottom into the concrete, and that eliminates much of the vibration. So there's a bunch of different tactics to mounting them, and contractors are generally wary of doing anything that would cause vibration, because that means callbacks, and they are allergic to callbacks.
Okay. I think you essentially answered this one, so I might just quickly clear it from the field. But the question was, how do heat pumps compare to regular electric baseboard during cold months? Is there a savings? I have been told that they have to work hard in the winter, so they are comparable to electric baseboard. So you essentially answered that.
I'll just touch that very quickly. So by definition, like when you burn electricity, it's 100% efficient, which means that it has a coefficient of performance of 1. For every 1 unit of electricity you put in, you get 1 unit of heat energy out. That's what resistance is. There's no circumstance with a heat pump where you're going to have your efficiency be as low as electric resistance. None. So you're always, if you have electric resistance as your option versus a heat pump, you're never going to turn your heat pump off. Even when we're at really, really cold temperatures and there's not much heat energy outside, and the unit has to work very hard to extract that heat energy, it still has a coefficient of performance around 2. So for every 1 unit of heat energy, of electricity that you put in, you get 2 units. So it's basically twice as you know, half the cost of running electric resistance, even when it's below 0 degrees Fahrenheit.
Great.
Great. Sort of piggybacking off of something you said in that explanation, is it wise to turn them off all the way off at night or during slightly warmer days, or better to leave them on at a constant temperature, say 60 degrees?
Yeah, I would run your heat pump for maximum benefit from your heat pump. And when I say that, I mean, like, I'm talking about comfort and savings. Picking a temperature that you feel comfortable at. Whatever temperature you have to set, you know, if you're using a remote, the remote doesn't sense temperature at the remote, it senses it at the indoor unit. And so even if you have to set the temperature on your remote at 76 degrees in order to feel comfortable in the kitchen that's 25 feet away, do it. Set it to whatever temperature makes you happy in your home, and try and keep it there. Now, I know Mainers and people across New England they turn it back at night because they're more comfortable. Fine. Turn it back a couple of degrees if you want to, but just understand that keeping it at a consistent temperature throughout the entire winter, and I mean your home, and just letting it work, will save you the most money and keep you the most comfortable. You know, so it seems strange, but it's been shown that like turning the temperature way back down and then having it ramp up versus just letting it ride at one temperature for heat pumps, it saves money to leave it at a consistent temperature. Conventional systems is a whole different thing, but we don't really have time to chat about that.
Okay, next question. I believe I heard you say multiple outdoor compressor units were needed with tight homes like BrightBuilt's because of their lower heat needs versus homes that are less tight, less insulated, and have high heat needs. Seems like it would be opposite. Can you please explain?
Yeah, so let's see. So they come in a wide range of sizes. So, you know, you might have an installer come into your house and you look through your house and you're like, well, I want all wall mount units and I want one in each one of the bedrooms and I want one in the basement and I want one in the 9 living space. And you're like, okay, great, that's 5 units. And they could look at their Mitsubishi catalog and be like, look, right here, here's a multi-zone system that can support 5 indoor units. We can select that. And that unit may put out a maximum at 5 degrees Fahrenheit, for instance, of 46,000 BTUs. But your house may only need, if it's a high performance home, may only need 25,000 BTUs at its peak of 5 degrees Fahrenheit. And when you get up to a warmer temperature, like 35 degrees, which, you know, we spend a good chunk of the winter between 20 and 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Now that home really, the entire home really only needs 8,000 BTUs. But that big hunkin' 5 unit outside, it doesn't turn down below 17,000 BTUs. So when you have all those days that occur between 8, 9, 10, 12,000 BTUs, the system turns on, it satisfies all the needs, it shuts off. It turns back on a little while later and satisfies all the needs and shuts off. And all of that cycling, every time you go through one of those cycles, it uses electricity that doesn't contribute to your heating or cooling. Alternatively, if you said, you know what, we're going to put in, you know, either a small multi and 2 single zone systems, or heck, we're going to go and put 5 single zone systems in, or we're going to whittle it down to, you know, 1 small ducted unit that will hit 3 bedrooms and then 2 single zones. So I have 3 outdoor condensers, but they're all small ones, right? So like you have like a ducted unit up in the attic that, you know, it does 12,000 BTUs, and you've got 2 6,000 BTU units, or 12,000 on the first floor and 9,000 in the basement. You look at it and you're like, well, I have the same combined, you know, total. I'm still approaching an overall capacity of, you know, 46,000 BTUs in the middle of the winter, which is way more than what I need. But the reality is that in those, you know, seasonal periods when you only need 10 or 12,000 BTUs, that 1 unit that's in your living room is going to end up doing everything you need. It's going to heat the haze and the warm air rises up, and you won't even turn on the units upstairs until you have extreme weather or need for cooling. And so, you know, then your units, the distribution becomes a little less important, but the indoor units, because they're single zones, are able to turn down to lower levels and operate independently. And so you end up saving energy and you have better control of your temperatures in your spaces. It's a lot to kind of absorb, but that's the kind of detail and training that we roll out to all of our contractors. And that's part of why, you know, finding contractors that are engaged in training with their manufacturers is important.
How are condensate tubes run in homes built on an insulated concrete slab?
Okay, so if you have indoor units that are, you know, not at exterior walls, then, and there's no reasonable way to get a drain to, you know, a gravity drain from the indoor unit, you'll need to use a condensate pump. So the flow of the condensate during cooling season will flow down into a little reservoir, and then when that reservoir fills up, the pump will turn on, and then you can pump it just about anywhere that you need to go, you know, dozens of feet away through some plastic tubing. Those condensate pumps do make a little bit of noise when they turn on, So that's something to be mindful of in selecting the location. And you can talk to your installer about the consequences of different placement as it relates to putting in condensate lines.
Okay, I'm going to do one quick yes or no question and then go to another question after that. In part because of time, we've got about just 3 or 4 minutes left. So quick yes or no. Do you recommend turning heat down if you are away from home for a period of time, like a vacation or something?
Yeah, I would say that threshold is around 3 days. If you're going to be if you're going to be away for more than 3 days, then you may want to consider a turn down ratio. But you know, even at a week, the amount of savings is going to be low. If you're going to be away for months, absolutely, you know, or weeks, turn it down to 50 or 60 degrees, whatever you feel comfortable having your house down to.
Okay. And then the design sizing of heat pumps seems to be critical to optimize the performance of the system. Yes. A few years ago, it seems as though there were very few people that knew how to properly design and spec a system. Is that different today, and what has changed?
We've been training the heck out of all of the contractors out there and going over the design loads and sharing these new strategies. I mean, we're still learning a lot about the proper applications of heat pumps, but you know, most of the contractors that I deal with understand the limitations that we're talking about, and it's really the biggest trouble. The biggest trouble that people can get into is if they simply select a single outdoor unit. And have many, you know, more than 3 heads. Because when you have a large system that really doesn't have the turn down ratio to get into the right range, that's the circumstance that you get into oversizing issues. Even multiple, you know, 3-zone systems, if they're properly staged, like, you know, one 3-zone system to handle the basement and first floor, and a second, you know, 3-zone system for the upstairs, the 2 of them end up playing off of one another, so that, you know, the upstairs unit takes care of most of the cooling, and then during the heating season, the downstairs unit takes care of most of the heating. Just by having that sort of like staged approach to the position of multiple units, you really avoid all of these major concerns about oversizing.
I'm going to do one last one. Okay.
Sure.
Can recess units be used at wall conditions? I assume, can they be installed in a wall?
No, and it really has to do with the condensate. So, you know, the condensate lines or your pans are positioned such that you have gravity of them falling into that and then going into a pump that pops them out. And so wall mount, ceiling mount units cannot be positioned horizontally.
Okay, somebody just chimed in with a question about us being able to answer all the questions that were submitted in the RSVP prior to the presentation. It looks as though at this time, we are going to be out of time to address all of those, but I wonder, Dana, if we put them together, would you be able to do quick written responses? Would that be doable for you? And we can just circulate that? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you wanted to just kind of put some spaces in them, I can answer them briefly in red. It might take me a couple of days to get to all of the questions, but I'd be happy to do that.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm sorry to put you on the spot with that question, but that's great. And so if you did submit a question that wasn't addressed during the dialogue and the presentation, we will get you an answer to that question. And thank you so much, Dana, for joining us today. And thank you everybody else who joined us as a participant. This has really been great, and we're really thrilled to get more of this information out there.
Well, thank you so much for your interest in heat pumps, and we're all moving in this direction, and it's part of the solution for decarbonization, and I'm happy to be a part of it.
Agreed. Thanks so much.
Right.
Take care, everyone.